let's get into some Husker basketball talk, BC. A big win for the boys at home. No surprise there that they won at home. Now it's about winning on the road. What about this performance do you think can spark momentum for them when they do go on the road against Maryland?
Well, you know what's impressive is I wouldn't say it was like a season on the brink. I wouldn't use those words, but like 5 days ago, they're 3-4 in the league. Jawan Gary's injured. You don't know how long that was going to be. And you're playing two solid teams in Northwestern and Ohio State at home. And yes, Nebraska's been good at the vault, but those are still tests. Every game in this league is. And to do it shorthanded without Gary, I think has to build a lot of confidence. I feel like if this season goes how people hope it to go and they end up in March in the brackets, I think the 24 to 48 hours after the Rutgers loss, which seemed like it was incredibly deflating at the time, is going to be a time to pinpoint. That's when the guys found out, okay, it's not as bad with Gary. He's not out for the season. They sucked it up on sort of a short notice after getting home late after that overtime loss. Played good ball against Northwestern, good enough to win. And then last night, Rink Mass, my goodness, it was just an incredible show. It got to that point where it's like, okay, just shoot at Rink. We want to see if you can, heat check time. Let's see if you make another one. So 6 of 8 for him from 3-point range, 34 points, career high. Got the double-double, which the crowd appreciated when he got that 10th board with about 3 minutes left. I would not have guessed they would have won going away by 14 points against Ohio State. I know the Buckeyes have struggled on the road. They haven't won on the road in the Big Ten since like January 1st of last year. But nonetheless, they had better metrics in the net and in KenPom than Nebraska did going into that game. So it's a really nice win from that standpoint. And now I think they're a determined group to go get one on the road. They know how big a deal that is to kind of break through there. And I like that in the post game last night, Rink was asked a question about what the night meant to him, and he turned it into, let's go win on the road. That he ended up making that what the quote was about. So that's where their mind has got to be today. And I think they've learned some lessons that they have to turn the page fast.
Brian, right now, if you're a Nebraska fan looking at the schedule, 11 games left, do these all, maybe an exception to a couple, feel like must wins for a good position to set yourself up for March?
Well, the way I look at it is I put the schedule up in front of me to remind me. And so if they can get to February 10th with their head above water, after February 10th, they play Michigan at home. And of course, everybody knows Michigan is really scuffling, which I don't think Juwan Howard's going to make it out of this year or, in the next year. They play Michigan at home, Penn State at home. They still get Minnesota at home, and they get Rutgers at home. And they actually play Michigan twice in those last 7 games. So that's after February 10th. So if they can get to that point, where they're still like a game above 500 like they are now, I think they're sitting pretty. This is a tough part of the schedule, and that's why last night was crucial to put the head above the water of the 500 mark, because you go on the road to Maryland. It's a winnable game, but it's a road game, and we know Nebraska's troubles there. Then you've got Wisconsin coming here, and Wisconsin, they're as good as anybody in the league, right up there with Purdue. And then you go to Illinois, and then you got to go to Northwestern. So they have this 4-game stretch of Maryland, Wisconsin, Illinois, Northwestern ahead. And if they could break even in that 4-game stretch, I'd feel really good about where they're at, as we get into February. So last night I felt was huge in that respect, because it lifts spirits where you're back above 500 in the league. And, now you're going on the road, not with house money, but if they do slip up on Saturday against Maryland, at least it's not like you're 4-6 in the league, and then it feels like you're really trying to climb uphill with your feet in the mud. So last night was really big from that standpoint.
BC, as you kind of reflect on more of those takeaways, without Juwan Gary's presence out there, who did you like seeing, whether it was off the bench or in the starting lineup, step up to sort of kind of replace Gary in that way?
Yeah. I wouldn't say he'd like replace Gary specifically, but CJ Wilcher, man. I mean, he's got to be like one of the stories for this team this year, especially if they can keep it going and get to a bracket. 16 points last night. I thought he hit the two biggest shots of the game. Ohio State sort of had momentum and had cut it to 46-43. Wilcher comes in off the bench, a role that he has accepted selflessly and just embraced it. And he hits a corner three off the inbounds pass. And like a minute later, he does the exact same thing in the same spot. And it was a 9-point game. And Nebraska sort of then just had Ohio State at arm's length or more the rest of the way, especially thanks to Rink Masset and everything he took. So CJ is a guy who he's had ups and downs in previous years. He's probably one of those guys, frankly, like a year ago when the season was ending, some people wondered, okay, is he going to be part of the roster still, or are they going to restructure it? Is he not going to be here? And he's just balling out when he gets the chance. And he's a great teammate. And, I think he has a lot of positivity in that locker room too. So everything about CJ Wilcher has been good for this team this year. And last night, he was a big reason they won that game and won it the way they did. Mast obviously is the headliner of that one, but CJ was right in line with that with some of the shots he made.
BC, is it March Madness or bust for this Nebraska team, especially in terms of Fred Hoiberg and his job security at Nebraska?
I don't know that I look at it that way. I understand why people ask that, though, because it's, he's been around a bit. The reason why I don't see it quite like that, though, is I feel like 2 years ago, he restructured how he was going to do things. He shuffled his staff. There were some key assistant coaches moves there. And I think with that, you saw how they kind of changed their roster and how they were going to pursue putting a team together. And they've went out since then. And I mean, last year's team sort of set the tone with this when he got Sam Grissel and Emmanuel Bandamel and, some of those guys who'd been around a while in college basketball, and they had this veteran poise about them that sort of brought a maturity and lifted up the program. And I think you're seeing that again this year with guys like Bryce Williams and Rink Mast. And so back to your question, I think some people won't accept this, but I think Trev Alberts kind of sees it this way when I hear him talk about basketball. He knows there was a reset that was done, and we're sort of in the second year of the reset. And so I'm not saying it's year two of Hoiberg era. Let's take the one they have in Men in Black and pretend like the first few years didn't happen. They obviously did, but I do think there's an understanding that, especially by people who matter, that they shifted their way of thinking, and it seems to be working. And so right now, I'd sort of be surprised if they busted it up no matter what, because I kind of think they feel like they figured out a formula now. It's just a matter of keep working on it until you get where you want to be.
BC, I was in talks with a listener yesterday, and it's funny because you see Dylan Raiola at the basketball game. You see where he's sitting. You see where he was moved to. He's sitting next to John Cook, and he asked me. He goes, how do you think his teammates feel about the way that Dylan Raiola is looked at, right? Like, because he comes in, he's the anointed one. He hasn't done anything yet. But if everything goes, to plan, and the expectation is hit, it's like, great, good things. But if not, then, Lord help us. You've been covering recruiting for a long period of time. Not only have you probably never seen a response like this from a recruit, but how do you kind of answer that question if it's asked to you? Like, how do the rest of his teammates feel about the way he is being treated?
I don't think they mind it if he's that guy starting in the last week or so when they've started winter conditioning that is front of the line and stuff. And you know what I mean with that. You know, the guy who, like, you say they're out there pushing the sled in the snow or whatever they're doing, he's sort of leading by example. He's that guy who people are feeding off of and is putting in as much work as anybody. And I think that is his way. He's got to obviously prove it to his teammates behind the walls that actually see it. And if he does that, I think it's fine, because these guys are smart enough to know that the way the quarterback situation is set up, he probably is the guy right now at that position. And also, they know that it's important for recruiting for the future too, and that it was important even for like those portal receivers like Jamal Banks. I've never had that, Andrew, in my life covering the team, where a guy like Jamal Banks, who played at Wake Forest and been in college for like 4 or 5 years, is talking before the visit about one of his reasons of intrigue is Dylan Raiola. Like, that's one of the things I want to see about my visit. And I mean, so you got the 23-year-old talking about the 18-year-old coming out of high school there. And it's just like, I've never had that quote given to me before. And so that is different. But from what Jamal said after his visit, you know, Dylan lived up to it, like the way he went about his business when they threw together, and just his technique and all that stuff. And he could tell the care he puts into it every day. So if he does that in front of his peers now in winter conditioning with all the other stuff, I think all the fanfare won't bother people. Now, if it looks like some of those guys who are big time recruits are slacking when they get here or whatever, I'm sure there'll be some people who want to put them in check, and hopefully they respond correctly. But it's a good question you asked, though. You've got to put in the work when you get here to make the people around you who matter the most, who you're going to be out there with when it's on the line, believe in you. And so hopefully that's happening here in the months ahead.
Well, I won't take too much question for the question or credit for the question, because it was asked to me. But I will give credit where credit's due. That listener is Thomas, who is avidly in our chat, that was wondering that. But speaking of Raiola and the weekend that he had at the Polynesian Bowl, how impressed were you with his play, with like Carter Nelson's play, and even, you know, maybe another guy, Preston Talamua, his play at the Polynesian Bowl?
I thought they all did pretty good. You know, I thought Carter Nelson probably showed the most to me in the All-Star games, because that was his second one. And of course, the question with Carter was like, okay, this guy played 8-man football. What's it going to look like against the top recruits in the country? And he looked every bit his ranking, you know, like it wasn't just the games. Like, we have people on the ground for our site, you know, at 24/7 Sports who cover the practices. And he was getting open all week at the Polynesian Bowl and seemed to have a really good rapport with Raiola. So you saw that on occasion within the game. I thought the one that Raiola dropped into him for about 30-some yards was a real pretty pass. But I also thought it got the imaginations of Husker fans dancing a little bit on that play where Raiola took it was a run pass option down the line, and then he just flipped it to the sideline, and Carter Nelson barreled for like 11 yards. It just looked like a play you could see in October, and I think it got people really excited. And Carter Nelson is a really exciting prospect, because you'll remember on early signing day probably, Rhule was talking about how this defense in his mind at Nebraska is sort of positionless in the way they operate, and they want the offense to be more like that. And he used Carter Nelson as an example of that, as you can put all over the field. And when you watch him out there in a game, even like that All-Star deal, you're kind of like, okay, I see that. Like, you really could line that guy up all over the place. I thought Dylan played fine. It was, of course, choppy because you've only worked with guys 4 days. I don't know exactly what happened on the pick, if the receiver ran the wrong route or it slipped out of Dylan's hand or what it was. But I thought in the second half it got better. And of the quarterbacks on his team, he was by far the best. And that's not a small thing, because those other QBs were big-time prospects too. So I think you saw a gap between him and other QBs who are supposedly elite. So that was, I think, promising.
BC, in your mind, how mature of a quarterback does DR look right now for his age? I mean, you see some passes over the middle, stepping up in the pocket. Maybe not as much of a dual threat necessarily, but more of that traditional quarterback and some maturity that at least I saw in the film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, he just has like the throws that other guys don't have, and the way he, even the touchdown pass he had, it was to Mike Matthews, who's a big time player who's going to Tennessee. And so he's going to make a QB look good, but it was about a 40-yard touchdown, but it was a rope from Raiola of about 20 yards downfield. And I think he made a throw that wasn't necessarily easy, look easy. And that pass he had to Carter Nelson, actually pretty good coverage on the play, sort of had to drop it in the bucket to make it a completion. And he put it right where it had to be. And there was another two plays I thought that probably should have been catches, including a touchdown, where he did what was asked of him on the throw. And so sort of as you went through that All-Star game and you saw I do think he showcased like 4 or 5 different types of throws he'd have to make, and he showed he could make them pretty well. And that part's exciting. And I think the other part is, the people watched him all week just said, I think they feel pretty good about him. Like the people evaluate him and watch him constantly, believe in his arm strength and the way he can stretch the field and all that. But I also think he's going to really pick up Nebraska's passing potential in that intermediate range. Like Nebraska's got to be a threat 10 to 20 yards down the field like it wasn't last year. And hopefully we see a little bit more of that now.
BC, one more, and then we'll let you go. In terms of recruiting and knowing that coaches are out on the road, who would you say are your top 3 names to know more about at this point on Nebraska's watch list?
Oh, man, that's a good question. I'll use that answer to kind of go through the weekend that was, because they obviously had the junior day.
Sure.
And because those are the guys are the answers in a lot of cases. I think it's fascinating that Isaiah Mosey is the wide receiver. He's at Lee Summit, Missouri.
Really good.
And he's like the number 1 prospect in that state, 87 overall. And he was in town this last weekend, and he was here last year as well. But I get this question all the time, like, okay, what's the Raiola effect going to be with recruits? Well, I think that Raiola effect translates with a guy like Isaiah Mosey, because Mosey was here last year when there was Raiola buzz before he originally picked Georgia, and now he's back again, and he's sort of talking about not just Raiola, but that's a part of his answer when he talks about his visit. And so I think, if you could get a guy like that, or be one of the finalists for him, top player in Missouri, that would be huge. His dad's also a coach down there, so it's like it would be a nice network to have. Locally, obviously, Christian Jones, I think from West Side is going to be huge, and I like Nebraska's chances a lot. The other one that I'd mention is another receiver from Florida, Cortez Mills, who's a top 24/7 receiver. And he was here, and he loved the plan they had for him, and another guy who I think is excited about Raiola. So those are the guys I just named. There's more, but they had a really good weekend on that end of it. I think getting guys further intrigued.
That's Brian Christopherson, senior writer for Husker 24/7 at Husker 24/7 BC on Twitter. BC, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brian Christopherson once again. Kevin Suits up next, sports director at 1011 News, at Kevin Suits on Twitter. I want to get his perspective on something. He's somebody that can latch on to a ton of different things. We'll do that next with Kevin Suits here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.